Howdy, and welcome to Brandi's Book Stack. Today, we'll be talking about the 10 best-selling books of all time, per Wikipedia. You might have watched my other video, the best-selling books of all time per Goodreads, but this list is very similar, but it is not the same. 7 of the 10 books on this list are the same as that other list, so if you reviewed that, the reviews will be pretty similar, but then there are 3 more that are exclusive to this list. As I've mentioned before, the reason I got into going through these lists is I first stumbled upon YouTube. I discovered that there were lists of these best-selling books of all time and was surprised to find there were some books I never heard about on the list. And that intrigued me to read further. And I decided to read the top 100 books of all time, but lists as you look at them on the internet differ a little bit. So I picked a couple. There's probably about 140 books between them total. And I'm going through those books, one at a time as I go through my reading career. I am a slow reader, so this isn't going to be a challenge that's wrapped up in a year. I hope that's encouraging to you, that you don't have to read hundreds of books a year to enjoy reading and to enjoy reading some of the best books of all time. So without further ado, let's jump in and start jumping through the stacks. So to start with, we have Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, or the Philosopher's Stone if you are in England. I know J.K. Rowling is a problematic author for many because of her statements regarding trans rights and some of her other political statements. I do try to separate an author from their work, and Harry Potter is just a really incredible story. I know there's a lot of, serious book critics that talk about how awful her prose is, how predictable the plots are. I think that's just jealousy or snobbishness because, there's a reason this book is beloved by so many people, and there's a reason it's a best-selling book of all time. Of course, if you've lived under a rock and you haven't heard, Harry Potter is a story of a young boy who is an orphan. He's living with his aunt and uncle who are extremely unkind to him when he discovers that he's actually a wizard and has gained acceptance to a wizarding school where he can go and learn magic. It's a charming book. The imagery is just so beautiful. And does it have plot holes? Absolutely it does. I think most fantasy books you can pick apart some plot holes, but it's really a lot of fun. And the world that's built here is just really enjoyable. It's unfortunate that J.K. Rowling has paired her political beliefs so with her brand, if you will, that I'm afraid the future will not just remember her as the author of a beloved children's story, but unfortunately also a bigot. But the story she wrote, at least, was really good if you separate it from the author. So that's number 1, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. Number 2 is a fascinating and incredible book, The Little Prince, and I'm not going to say the name because I can't speak French and I will butcher it. So I'll put it real close to the screen and you can read the name for yourself. If you're a French speaker, that way I won't mess it up for you. This is a beautiful book, and it contains a number of illustrations. Maybe I can kind of flip through and show a few of those. It's the really charming story of an imaginary prince from another world who goes around to find other experiences, and he leaves because he's kind of bored of his home. He thinks there must be something better out there. He argues with the rose that he tends on his planet. But then he discovers, like so many of us in life, that the only things that are important are the invisible. Things like love and the caring that you have for other people. He discovers that the rose that he tended on his planet that even though there are a million other roses, that one rose is important because it was his to love, his to hold in his heart. It sounds, describing it, even hearing myself describe it, it sounds like it would be cheesy and kind of oversimplified, but it's really not. You just have to give this book a try. It's extremely short. It's only 83 pages in this volume, and I think this is one of the more famous, versions of it. It's not a fancy pants version. It's just a paperback. But it's an incredible story, and it's a heartwarming story. Something I think we all need in our lives is something that brings us joy versus pain. I think it's really interesting that this charming, heartwarming, cozy sort of book was written by a war hero. This was written by the author not long before his plane crashed in World War II, I believe it is. Yeah, World War II. And I think, I can't remember if he was never recovered or if they found his body, but he crashed and unfortunately perished. I'm really excited. Someday I would like to read the author's book. I think it's called The Sun, Sand, and Stars or something like that, which is about his experience as an aviator, which is supposed to be one of the best books written about the joy of aviation. So, and I have a brother who's very into that, so I thought he might enjoy that as well. But The Little Prince, you should definitely get a shot. 5 out of 5 stars. I should have mentioned, Harry Potter for me also 5 out of 5 stars. So there's that. Number 3 is The Dream of the Red Chamber. I read this one on my Kindle. This is a very long epic. It is one of the 5 works of 5 classical texts in Chinese. The author of this, and I'm going to butcher his name, I believe it's something like Cao Tzuchun. This epic by Cao Tzuchun is found in many translations. I was a cheap person and went with what was available free on Gutenberg. And unfortunately, what was available on Gutenberg was not perhaps the best translation that was offered. It was written by a bureaucrat, and the translation is not very good, and it only does the first 2 volumes of the story. So if you want the whole story, I would really suggest just start with the Penguin translation. I thought it's really good. I'll put the translators down here on the screen. But the long epic that is The Dream of the Red Chamber, it's really like nothing I've ever read before. And when I say long, we're talking about 2,500 pages or so printed out. And mainly you follow a young boy as he grows up. His name is Bao Yu. And he grows up in this sort of aristocratic, almost court, I would say. And it is run by his grandmother, who is the matriarch, his grandfather having been deceased, and a number of other women sort of run things. And one of the things that I really found surprising and wonderful about this book is how much women feature in the book and how much their tales are told. Bao Yu surrounds himself with his female cousins and a lot of his sort of servants, and he gets his own way because he's the darling of the family. He's the one who the family's hopes solely lie upon. The family has kind of fallen into ruin. Financial ruin. They've had, one member went off and became a monk, so he's not bringing anything in. One's kind of a raconteur, and he's not bringing anything in. And it really, when you look at all the male heirs, Bao Yu's the only one that can bring success to the family. And because of that, he's coddled and given everything that he wants. But he also discovers in hanging around his cousins, his female cousins, that the limited choices that they have. Because even though this family is more or less run by the females, it's still the males with more or less the real power. And the only reason the females are really running things is because the grandmother is the matriarch and the grandfather has passed. Bao Yu realizes how much, his relatives are trying to manipulate his future to get him to kind of go along with the family's wishes and take care of the family. And that is, although that's the core story, there's lots and lots of little side plots. In some ways, it's almost kind of like the Arabian Nights or something like that, where there's sort of little episodes here and there sprinkled throughout. It's really, really interesting. It's definitely worth a read, but understand when you get into it, you're going to be into it for a while because it is a long book. But definitely worth reading, and it's a good insight into another culture and another time as well. I believe it's supposed to take place somewhere in the 1700s, you think about that, and then you think, like Marie Antoinette, it kind of same period. And it's kind of an interesting a difference of, and yet also similarities, sort of the same court structure where everyone's, sticking knives in everybody else's back is there as well. So very enjoyable. The next one on the list, I think, is a book I just realized I didn't pull. Oh yeah, I did. I'm sorry. It's right. I was looking for my other copy. I showed my other copy in the other video, so I thought I'd show my I showed my prestige copy in the other video, but I thought I'd show my non-prestige beat up old copy of The Hobbit that I read when I was in middle school. This is, as you can tell by the tape and the well-worn pages, even the well-worn bookmark that's been shoved in here from the old Lord of the Rings movies. This is a well-loved story for me. The Hobbit, 5 out of 5. Just such a wonderful, homey, cozy story about a hobbit, a halfling, a small person who does incredible things. That's why I think it makes such a great children's book, because it allows children to see themselves in the position of a hero, to believe that they can do wonderful things. And this hobbit is selected by a wizard to go on an adventure to help some dwarves reclaim their kingdom, which has been taken by a dragon. Super fun story. It also serves as the prelude to The Lord of the Rings, which is a great stepping stone for kids, because you can start with The Hobbit and then you can work your way up to The Lord of the Rings, which is a more serious but still wonderful story. I actually like The Lord of the Rings better than The Hobbit, which is opposite from a lot of people's point of view. But I just feel like The Lord of the Rings is so much richer. It has so much more depth. Whereas The Hobbit is just more or less a fun adventure story. If you've never read The Hobbit, give it a shot. Tolkien, I will admit, can be hard to get into for some people. He writes high fantasy. This is not, just your popcorn bestseller type of writing. But once you get into it, it's really thrilling and intriguing, and I think you'll love it. The next book on the list is another one of my very favorite books. And you've probably seen me show these Franklin Press editions of Agatha Christie before, but that's And Then There Were None. 5 out of 5 again. Of course, this is a best of list, so you would expect that most of them would point high. And Then There Were None, in my opinion, is the best mystery story ever told. We follow a cast of characters invited to a mysterious island by the mysterious Mr. U.N. Owen, or Unknown. And one by one, they start dropping like flies, and they start dropping in accordance with a nursery rhyme that outlines how each one of them will die, and they are all dying in accord with the nursery rhyme. The one bad thing you always have to mention when you talk about this book is in some versions it's not called And Then There Were None. It's called other titles, which I will not mention because they are not appropriate in today's context. And that's the one terrible thing. I really wish that wasn't a part of this book. But other than that, this book is just darn near perfect, in my opinion. And it has one of the best twist endings that I know I didn't see coming. Maybe others did, but I sure didn't. And I thought it was a really incredible, just an incredible story. So, and again, Agatha Christie's books, they're also pretty short. They don't take a terribly long time to read. So this is something, you have a couple of days, you can probably knock this out easily, even if you're a fairly slow reader. Totally recommend, And Then There Were None. Next book on the list is another favorite of mine, and that is my big honker here, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis. This is a collection of all the Narnia stories by C.S. Lewis. There are 7 books, so the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is a 7th of this length. If you have not tried The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, it's such a beautiful story. It's about some children during the Blitz in London. Their parents, like many parents at that time, sent their children to the countryside for their safety, so that if London was bombed, the children wouldn't be harmed. So it has this sort of dark feeling undertone to it, even though it's a children's novel. And we follow 4 siblings as they stay with a professor while they're waiting for the danger of the Blitz to be over. And one of them discovers a wardrobe that leads to a magical world ruled by a white witch who makes it always winter and never Christmas. And it's about their adventures defeating the white witch in the first book, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. You should be aware, if you're not already, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is an allegory of the crucifixion of Christ. If that makes you uncomfortable, then maybe not the book for you. I do think it could be enjoyable by those who don't particularly ascribe to a Christian religion, just as a fantasy story. I am of the Christian faith, so I enjoyed it. But I don't think that you have to be of that particular faith to enjoy this book. But The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. 5 out of 5 again. Do we see a trend? The next is another book that I read on my Kindle, and that is She, A History of Adventure by H. Rider Haggard. This was one of the books I had never heard of. And on some of the best-selling lists, not the 2 I ended up picking, but on some of the best-selling lists on the internet, this is listed as the best-selling book of all time. And I thought, how crazy is that it's a book in English that I've never heard of. I read this. I'd heard of H. Rider Haggard. I'd heard of King Solomon's Mines and the Alan Quatermain books, but not this one. And I'm not really sure why that is. It may be because this author was writing in a past time, there are some problematic elements to the story. There are some natives who are described as cannibalistic and not so flattering terms. But in the beginning, this book, I felt like it was more or less a kind of standard run-of-the-mill type of adventure story. Kind of something you might expect to see in like an Indiana Jones TV series type thing. But as we go along, and when the character, she who must be obeyed, takes the stage, that's when it really became something special, in my opinion. This story, the setup is about a young man who's been orphaned, and there's some sort of legend in his family, and there's a message in a chest that, basically tells him he can go seek his fortune and discover, what these mysteries in his family are all about, or he can, just live out his life and be happy. And he, of course, chooses adventure. And the man who is his guardian, has been appointed his guardian, decides, well, he's got to go with him because he's supposed to look after him and protect him, and wants to be a part of wherever he's going and whatever he's doing. And so, they go through the Amazon, and they get to, the heart of the Amazon, and there they find, again, she who must be obeyed, who is an immortal being, that is a strong, powerful female, sort of like a Cleopatra come back to life, maybe, if you will. And she has loved previous incarnations of the main hero and seeks to make him hers again. And the hero, he's overcome by her beauty and sort of her presence and aura, but this isn't really what he wants or what would be good for him. And his friend works to protect him throughout all this as well. It's very fascinating. She is just an incredibly interesting character and supposedly influenced some of the famous female characters in fiction, like Jadis, the White Witch in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, Galadriel in The Lord of the Rings. I don't know how true those stories are, but that's the word, is that they influenced some of those characters. And I can certainly see that resemblance of this strong, powerful, almost otherworldly woman in this story. I really enjoyed it. 5 out of 5 for me. She was a great read and a lot of fun. The next book on the list is one I did not enjoy so much. That is The Adventures of Pinocchio by Carlos Collodi. This was a translated Italian novel, and if you've seen Pinocchio, the Disney versions, parts of that are similar, parts are not. I think, it's obvious how this book was written, and it was intended to teach children to value their family and to obey their parents. And certainly, those are, reasonable messages for a children's book. I just didn't find them very enjoyable, and I kind of thought Pinocchio was a little brat. But I guess it also kind of shows how, parents never stop loving their children no matter how bratty they are. Because Pinocchio treats Geppetto pretty awfully. Geppetto gives him his winter coat, and it's the only coat that he has, and Pinocchio just, flitters it away and then, has nothing to show for it, and Geppetto forgives him. And episodes like that just happen over and over again to the point you're like, man, why don't you just give up on this Pinocchio? He's a pretty bad kid. But I just didn't enjoy it. I didn't find the story very enjoyable. I didn't really particularly love the Disney movie either when it came out, so maybe if you really enjoyed that, you'd really enjoy this little Italian novel, but it wasn't for me. I read that one. I actually did purchase a copy of that book, but I already have unhauled it because I knew I would not have a desire to reread it. So that's Pinocchio. The next book on the list is another one I didn't enjoy all that much, also a 2-star read for me, and that's The Da Vinci Code by Dan Brown. When I first read this novel, I enjoyed it. I think I gave it 4 stars, and I really scratched my head why I gave it that high. Maybe just because it was such a cultural zeitgeist at the time. I think I was in college when I read that, or maybe when I was first young and married. It reads too much like a male fantasy to me. This obscure professor gets called to a man to, answer a question, and when he shows up, the man is dead and has left him all these clues to try to solve. And of course, there's a beautiful woman that happens to be his granddaughter that shows up wanting to help him solve these clues, and they get crosswise of the police and go on this adventure. And of course, it goes through a lot of famous artwork, and a lot of the clues are in famous artwork and famous places. I will say, if you're looking for historical accuracy in Dan Brown, you're not going to find it there. Also, I found there's an albino character in this. He's like an albino monk, and I really felt like he was oddly out of place. Like, they're trying to make this albino monk this like sinister character, and it kind of reminded me of Jaws in the James Bond movies. Like, it was almost over the top and silly, and that didn't do much for me. I just, like I said, I just didn't dig on this book too much. Just wasn't the thing for me. So it was a fast read. I will give it that. It was fast paced. The adventure was written in a good, quick paced way, but the plot was just kind of meh for me. The last one is another Harry Potter book, and that's the second in the series, The Chamber of Secrets. It's no secret for me. I like all of these Harry Potter books. In this one, of course, there's a chamber that's opened at Hogwarts, and a lot of people are turning to stone, and we have to try to figure out who the heir of Slytherin, who is opening this chamber and spiriting away some of these students, who is doing that. And it's an excellent follow-up to her first novel. I would say the first and second novels, I think, they read more as middle grade books. These books do kind of grow with the reader. So if you start reading this when you're pretty young and you read, like a book a year, it's going to grow with you because the stories become darker and a little bit more adult with each one. They face a little bit more danger. It becomes a little bit more high stakes with each succeeding novel. And that's one of the things I actually love about this series, is that it does kind of increasingly get better and more involved and more detailed. So 5 out of 5 for me again with Harry Potter. It's a great series and a great set of novels. Maybe get them secondhand so you don't give J.K. Rowling any money, if that's a concern for you. All right. Well, that is the top 10 as per Wikipedia. What do you think? Do you think these books belong on the list? Do you have suggestions of your own as what should be on a top 10 list? I know that's something I struggle with. Only picking 10? How do you only pick 10? That's hard. But anyway, let me know what your thoughts in the comments down below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and click that bell. Thanks for watching. Bye.